Hello there and welcome to this channel, Slay Tuned. I was about to do Torathina's entrance then and that was weird. If you know me, and most people probably watching this video do, then you'll know that this isn't my first YouTube channel. This is my first video on this channel, but not my first YouTube channel. Basically, I run another channel called Torathina, which is all geek stuff, which I've been running for a couple of years now, and as much as I love it and continue to do it, my future career path is changing somewhat, and I'm currently in university studying history. My main goal in life one day is to be a curator, historian, something like that, and I'm also a very morbid person. So I love the idea of having a passion project like this, where I dedicate a channel talking about historical events which I love that are usually surrounded in death. This channel will be dedicated to serial killers, mystery murders, whodunits and all that. And I also like the idea of doing something else as well. One of my favourite books, 5 Women, is based off the 5 women who were believed to be murdered by Jack the Ripper. Each story is historical and accurate account of their lives, some from even when they were born, all the way up to the night of their death. It's based on censuses, testimony, written testimony, evidence, diaries, everything, and it's all true, and it was written so well that I just fell in love with it. And as the author said, that we constantly, figuratively and metaphorically, step over the victims' bodies to gawk at the curiosity that is the murder. So as much as I'm excited doing the classic exciting videos about serial killers, murders and stuff like that, I'm also excited about giving a voice to the victims as well, possibly, depending on how good my research actually is. But this first video is a standard whodunit. It's one of Finland's most unsolved murders, or most popular unsolved murders, about 4 teenagers that went camping one night to Lake Bodom and was attacked, and 3 of them brutally murdered, and to this day no one's ever found the murderer. And the reason why I'm picking this one is because on the day that it's uploaded, 5th of June, is 60 years to the day that this murder happened. Also, disclaimer, I'm sorry if the lighting changes and the sound is so bad, because I'm currently at my dad's during isolation and all my equipment and my very padded bedroom is not here because that's in the flat in Liverpool. So if you aren't happy with the quality, don't worry, that will get better. It will, I promise. Also, disclaimer, I'm sorry if I pronounce anyone's name wrong. I have very thoroughly researched how to say their names, but I am awful and the English gene might kick in and I apologise. But let's begin. So on the 5th of June in Finland, there was 4 teenagers who wanted to go to Lake Bodom for the night to go fishing, camping, have a good time without parents around. And they went by the names of 2 15-year-old girls called Malia and Meli Bieklo. I know I've pronounced that wrong, I'm so sorry. And Anja Maki. They were both 15-year-old girls who went with their boyfriends, Seppo Boisman, who was 18, and Niels Gustafsson, who was also 18. Anja and Seppo had been dating for about a year, but Maja and Niels was quite new. They'd only been dating for about a month. The couples rode up on their motorbikes and set up camp. They put up a very traditional triangular tent that all 4 were going to share, and they had gone fishing, they had had fun. By all accounts, there's no source saying that there'd been any arguments, and it was just a nice, uneventful evening that teenagers get up to. And around midnight, they all went to bed in the same tent. Now, according to the autopsy, around 4 AM, someone had come over and cut the tent wires, and then while the tent had fallen down on them, some unknown person had slashed the tent with a knife and was also hitting them with a blunt object. These weapons have never been found, but we do know there was a knife and a blunt object, but we don't know what that is. It could be a lead pipe, it could be a baseball bat, it could be anything. Obviously, because this is a murder case and the murderer has never been discovered, it's not really known what actually happened during this event. But when the tent was discovered, Seppo and Anja were still inside the tent. Seppo had died from a puncture wound in the right lung, and Anja's primary cause of death was a fracture to the skull, and she had not been stabbed at all. It was just a fracture that had killed her. Mila was found outside the tent, topless. Her primary cause of death was also a fracture to the skull, but she'd also endured 15 stab wounds to the neck, 3 to her face, and there was recorded that there was a lot of damage to her hands and fingers as well, but I don't know what damage. Niels was passed out on top of the tent and he is the only survivor. But at the moment he has multiple fractures on his face, he has a deep wound on his cheek, and he is so heavily concussed that he is just passed out on top of the tent. It has been documented by the majority of the media that Risto Siren is the person that discovered the campsite around 11 AM. However, I did find one newspaper in 2016 claiming that it was actually discovered by a carpenter called Esko Johansson, but that's all I found, and I don't think the paper went anywhere with that. But it's interesting to point out. When the crime scene was discovered, obviously it was in 1960, so there was no mobile phones. So they had to go and run and get a payphone, and the police didn't get there until about midday. And unfortunately, from this point on, quite a few mistakes happened within the case that may be the reason why we've never found the murderer. The locals were so shocked that this happened that so many of them kindly wanted to help the investigation by finding clues or evidence that could help find the murderer. However, unfortunately, this is not a good thing really, because the police should have sealed off the crime scene, which they didn't, and they actually helped a lot of people trudge through the lake looking for evidence which they could have ruined, contaminated, or the murderer could have even been one of the people volunteering and got rid of the evidence. So it's very safe to say that the crime scene was heavily contaminated. Also, when it came to looking at the evidence, there was very little consistency in what had been taken and discovered to understand what had happened. And by that I mean wallets were taken, but other curiosities were also taken. Anya's towel was stolen, Seppo's shirt, Niels' tote bag and pliers have also been documented as taken, and more importantly to the confusion, the motorcycle keys were taken, but not the motorcycles. So it's not a very clear, it was like a robbery gone wrong, it's a murder with some curiosities and trinkets taken. The most unusual find of all was that I get different numbers from different sources here. Some say 1 pair of shoes, some say 2 pairs of shoes, but at least 1 pair of shoes were found about 500 meters away from the campsite. It was Niels' shoes covered in blood, so believed to have taken after the murder, and they were buried at the side of the road. Some other sources say on the other side of the road, just on the ground, was Seppo's shoes, but that is not consistent in every paper. Seppo's shoes did not have any blood on, and so I guess the most important ones to focus on is the blood-covered shoes, which were Niels'. By the end of July in 1950, over 50 witnesses had come forward with claiming to have seen things, but no arrests had been made. Throughout of June, they were chasing leads and looking as much as they could, but they were struggling. Niels had had concussion when he had been passed out, and when he woke up, he said he couldn't really remember anything. So on the 2nd of July, they hypnotized him. Niels recounted that he could hear the girls screaming as someone was hitting the tent. He remembered trying to climb out the tent and someone hit him. And although he was able to describe the person, the attacker, under hypnosis, it was a very generic description. He described someone who was between 20 and 30 years old, around 5'8", with a normal body type and his face round. One of the most significant features he had described was that this person had long light or blonde hair, but doesn't describe the actual description of how long it is, just that it's long. His ears were ordinary and not protruding, and his earlobes were round. His forehead was high and wrinkly with horizontal lines. His nose was straight from all sides and neither long nor short. He described his eyes as long, but didn't know the colour, with ordinary and light eyebrows, and his lips were thick. His teeth were white and his chin was protruding. His neck was short with thick hands and long fingers. And he also had some acne on his cheeks and on his forehead. All he could recount as well is from the clothes were dark, but it was a checked shirt. Based on what Niels had described, they made drawings of what they believed the attacker could look like. And even more spooky than the drawings themselves, there is believed at the picture of the funerals for the victims that there was a man who attended every single one who fitted that description. However, the pictures are quite old and grainy, and I think he kind of did describe such a generic person that it doesn't really condemn that poor person in the photograph, but I do think it's an interesting part of a whodunit to think that someone was that bold that they would even just turn up at the funerals. Like I said, by the end of July, over 50 people had come forward with information, but realistically, the most important to look at were the 4 witnesses that were at Lake Bodom on the night of the murder. It's important to remember that at this time of the year, at 4 a.m, it's actually pretty light, maybe even full daylight at that time. So the fact that people were walking around at this time wasn't unusual. And around 4 a.m, there were 2 15-year-old boys at the lake who had gone to go bird watching. Now they actually said to the police eventually that they'd heard shouting. That's all they said, shouting. They didn't say screaming, they said shouting. And when they did see the campsite, they actually saw the campsite and they saw a man lying down on top of the tent. One other source says the boys even said that they saw a man stand up from behind the tent and walk away towards the east side of the beach. But they didn't do anything about this. They didn't explain in the sources why. They didn't explain whether they thought he was asleep, whether they were scared, or we get the impression of that they didn't really care about the people at the campsite. They cared about the motorbikes. They were paying a lot of attention to the motorbikes. And that's kind of it. They could have been the best witnesses possible, and in all sources, it doesn't seem to say that they pushed the matter any further with these boys. I mean, honestly, in my 2 cents, I would have even possibly put them under suspicion because of who sees a campsite with a man lying down and doesn't investigate it. It doesn't make sense to me. It sounds a bit of a bloodbath. That tent was destroyed, and if you saw this collapsed, horrible tent with someone bludgeoned and on top of it, you don't do anything. I think it's really weird. Another boy who was 14 by the name of Allie was fishing at the lake, and although he said he never heard anything and he did not see the campsite, he did see a man walking hurriedly across the lake, and he kind of fitted the description that Niels had described in the sense that the man had light hair and dark clothing. The 4th and final witness was Allie. She was the wife of the caretaker who was looking after Bodom Manor. At 3:45 a.m, she had gone down to the lake to wash her clothes, and she said that she could see 2 young men fishing. They were shouting and one got up and walked away. A lot of authorities have put out calls trying to find them 2 boys, but they never ever came forward. However, Niels does say that in the middle of the night he woke up and Seppo was awake and couldn't sleep, and they went for a walk and they went fishing and then they came back and went to bed. Them 2 boys that she saw could have been them, although I don't know why no one also investigated that. I can't find that in sources either. Naturally as well, because Niels couldn't positively identify anyone and the description was pretty generic, there were plenty of witnesses. The first man to be arrested was Paulie Lumi. On the 6th of July in 1960, a man asked a carpenter for a cigarette or for a lighter, and the carpenter noticed as he passed over the lighter that the man who took it had bloodied clothing or bloodied sleeve, and he found it really suspicious. His appearance matched the description of the attacker, and he was arrested and interviewed. He was described as very introverted, but apparently he also had a solid alibi. Even with a criminal record of robbery and theft, apparently on the night he had been 20 kilometers away with another group of homeless people. So I'm also assuming that this man was also homeless, which kind of makes it less suspicious that there's blood-like splatters on his shirt, I'd imagine, because if even if he's had a nosebleed, he's not going to be able to wash his clothes often. I don't know, it was kind of a weird suspect, I think, to be arrested. I don't know. Well, they're doing their job. They're doing their job. Another suspect that was never really taken seriously, but he was a suspect serious enough to have been mentioned in many sources, was a guy called Pentti Salminen. In 1969, he was sitting in Kuopio County Jail for crimes against property and violence. He was sitting around a group of other prison inmates, and he was known for alcohol and drug abuse. They were talking about what was the worst crimes they'd known in Finland, and for some reason, out of the blue, Pentti confessed to being responsible for the Lake Bodom murders. He grew up around the area, and when I think he was 18, he ran away from home. But because he was from around the area, he would have known the area and the lakes well. He claimed on that night he had gone to the lake and he'd saw these 4 young teenagers laughing and having a good time, and he got really angry at them and he snapped and he killed them. But it was completely dismissed because they just believed he was being fame hungry. Later in the year, in 1969, in a different jail, he killed himself. He never left a suicide note. We'll never know if he actually did commit the murders, but his testimony was never really taken that seriously. And like all crimes, there were main suspects. And in this particular case, there were 2 huge ones. The first suspect was Carl Bodom Murders. He owned a kiosk on the lake and was very well known for not really liking campers. In fact, he loathed them. He actually was also known for cutting tent wires before, which is a suspicious similarity to the murder where tent wires were cut. He had also been known for putting razors in apples to stop people stealing them, but then he's just selling fruit with razor blades in them. He'd thrown rocks at children who ride back. He was just a horrible man and everyone knew that. I even found 1 or 2 testimonies or sources that claimed that he was known for carrying knives and lead pipes in his shoe. Even more incriminatingly, when he was drunk, he confessed apparently multiple times to his neighbour that he had killed the children. He'd killed the children on that night, came back to his home, threw the weapons into a well that was on his property and sealed it up. The police didn't really take that much attention to him. They called him disturbed or a drunk, but they did search the house. However, they didn't search the well. They searched the house and found nothing and then left. He also had an alibi, which may have made the police a little less suspicious of him. His wife said that he had been by her side the whole night. Police never took the DNA of Carl because it was the 60s, and in 1969, Carl was found dead in Lake Bodom. To this day, we don't know whether that was an accident, murder, or suicide. And it's really infuriating because the case was reopened in 2005. And on a pillowcase, a 40 by 46 centimeter pillowcase, which they thought was a sanitary towel, they found Mylia's blood and someone's semen. And in the reopened case, they were able to test the DNA and prove that it was neither Neil's nor Seppo's. So another man's DNA was there, and they will never be able to compare it with Carl. Also, more suspiciously, when his wife died on her deathbed, she confessed that she was made to lie about her alibi under threat that he would murder her. She was obviously afraid of him, and she was convinced he was the murderer. Also, witnesses eventually came forward and said that they saw Carl leave the lake that night of the murder. They may not have come forward at the time because, like I said, he was well known for being a horrible man, a violent man, and people may have been afraid of him. A politician by the name of Johansson was 18 when these murders happened, but he was so convinced that Carl was the murderer that he wrote a book proving that how negligent the police had been, not taking certain leads seriously, still not opening up the well. The link for all my sources will be below, including a link towards this man's book. The second suspect became a suspect as early as June 6th. The day after the crime happened. This is a man called Hans Osman, who was a German immigrant who came over after the Second World War. He was an alleged KGB spy, and he was a guard at Auschwitz. He was known for taking drugs, and he was incredibly violent and did have a criminal record for it. He had long blonde hair, which he cut off the day after the murder, and on June the 6th, he admitted himself into Helsinki Hospital, which is not too far from Lake Bodom, and the nurses noted that he had dirt under his nails and his clothes were stained red. He looked a mess and he kept trying to avoid questions, mainly by pretending that he kept passing out. And whenever a doctor came up to him, he would just pretend that he was unconscious. There was even a time where a doctor was poking him with a needle and he just woke up and went, "Stop that, doctor." There was no cuts on him that had been reported, but he did keep asking for alcohol to clean himself up with. They didn't have alcohol, but they did give him gasoline, and it was also reported that he stayed up all night washing his hands. He was also suspected of multiple other murders in the area. The police took his bloodied clothes, but didn't test them because he had an airtight alibi, but then didn't disclose what the alibi was until 2016. And the alibi was that he was sitting at the breakfast table with his girlfriend and his landlord, so he couldn't possibly have done the murder. Hans had a lot of suspected connections, maybe to politics, maybe the KGB, we don't know. But it does sound pretty suspicious that there was a lot of incriminating circumstantial evidence that, and he was acting very strange. For the police to just drop it like that and not disclose a very weak alibi, that's suspicious. It's actually so suspicious that a detective wrote a book condemning Hans Osman to be the murderer, not only to this murder, but 5 others. So we have 2 main suspects who look so incriminating that 2 very self-made men have written books about why they are both definitely guilty. In 1977, just before his death, he was interviewed, and it is believed that he kind of admitted it by not admitting it. He was quoted saying, "Of course you expect me to tell about those things, but I have to disappoint you. I will not speak about the details. I will not admit nor deny anything. You have to just understand things from my speech, or understand them otherwise. You can say I have confessed something. The truth is found between my story and its lies." And like I said, in 2004, not 2005, which I said before, the case was reopened again after 46 years. Through more modern technology, they were able to test the blood on the shoes, and they identified it as all 3 victims who had died, but not Neil's. And because of this, Neil's now became the 3rd and final suspect. The police even claimed that he had always been the main suspect, but they couldn't do anything about it at the time. And in 2004, at 62 years of age, Niels Gustafsson was arrested. In 2005, the Finnish Bureau of Investigation claimed that the case was closed and the murderer was found, and a trial was set. After over a year of him being in prison, the trial started. On August the 4th, 2005, the prosecution called for Niels to have life in prison if found guilty. And they were adamant he was. They painted up this story that he was this jealous lover and Seppo and Maya may have flirted together and he went in a rage and killed them, but it was all circumstantial. It was all tying this shoe together. They kept saying the shoe is the answer, the shoe is the answer. But the defense was arguing many things, saying he was massively wounded. He was massively concussed. How can someone that wounded, who was collapsed on top of his friends, on top of a tent, passed out and with fractured facial bones, have the consciousness to go on a mile-round trip to bury some shoes? It's just, nothing about this case either way really adds up. A witness even came forward claiming that on the night of the murder, in the middle of the night, this woman was asleep in her tent and Seppo and Niels came into the tent acting aggressively and then left. And this is all I can find about her as well. Like, it's incriminating that this witness has come forward. I get that sometimes victims don't feel safe to come forward. I do understand that. But it's just not enough information in my opinion. Why did they come in? Why were they being aggressive? It's crazy. The defense dismissed all the case and he was actually found innocent. At one point, a journalist did ask him, "How do you know you're innocent when you can't remember anything?" And he said, "I am innocent. That's that." And everyone agreed with him because when he was found innocent, the government had to pay him 44,900 euros to say sorry for being in prison for a year as an innocent man. He even wanted to sue the newspapers for defamation of character, but he was informed that just wouldn't happen. He wouldn't be allowed. And that's kind of it. The case couldn't go any further. He wasn't guilty. The case was closed again. It's a cold case. And no one will probably ever find who the murderer is unless they open the well. Like, why aren't they opening the well? But thank you so much for watching my first video, a murder mystery video. What did you think of it? Did you enjoy the story? Was it too long? Are you also confused at why they haven't opened the well? Would you like to hear more stuff like this? Because there's no point doing this video if people don't. Thank you so much for watching, and don't forget to stay tuned. Oh, I hate that. Thank you so much for watching. If there's a particular murder or serial killer or anything like that that you'd like me to investigate and do a video on, also please comment that below, and don't forget to subscribe. Thank you very much. Bye.